Sonobe, Japan, 1960. A small farming town about an hour northwest of Kyoto. Surrounded by rice fields, bamboo forests, and rolling hills that a kid could disappear into for entire afternoons and not be missed. Shigeru Miyamoto was 8 years old. His father taught English at the local school. Modest work, modest pay. The family lived in a small house, didn't own a car, and didn't own a television. Not because his parents had a philosophy about screens. Not because they thought TV would rot his brain. They just couldn't afford one. Shigeru did what most kids did when there was nothing to do. He didn't go watch TV at his friends' houses. Instead, he went outside. He built toys out of wood and string. He put on puppet shows. He made his own flip books. He biked through the countryside. And sometime around his 8th or 9th year, outside of town, he found a hole in the ground. A cave. Dark, quiet, unknown. He didn't go in right away. For days he came back to that hole in the ground and stood at the edge of it. He was a kid, not an idiot. He didn't know what was in there. There could have been hornets, which in Japan can cause organ failure if you're stung by the giant variety. But something in him wanted to know. For days, the absolutely not part won. Eventually, his need to overcome the cave won out. He built himself a homemade lantern. Because of course he built it himself. He was a kid who made his own toys. So he lit it, held it out in front of him, and went in. One hole led to another. The cave wasn't just a cave. It was a system of tunnels, and every time he thought he had seen everything, there was another passage, another chamber, another darkness that his lantern hadn't reached yet. Exploring his cave didn't end in the afternoon. Miyamoto kept coming back, exploring new chambers and tunnels for the rest of his childhood. Decades later, Miyamoto was trying to explain where the Legend of Zelda came from. The dungeons, the sense of exploring a world that seemed endless, the feeling of being small and inferior, having to build and scrap for everything you have, while also moving forward through something enormous and unknown. He told the press that the inspiration for Zelda came from wandering the countryside and going in that cave, which was the same feeling he wanted to capture in Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. In fact, Miyamoto's entire life seemed to be a repeat of that exact feeling. From failing at engineering school and feeling like he was a small student in a very large machine, to applying for his first job at Nintendo, a huge entertainment company, and being told to get lost, to finally being given the chance to work on video games. But instead of designing the characters and story, he was told to build the case around the console. Because he was a small boy in front of a very large, nearly infinite machine, and his only choices, again and again, were to give up and go home, or build a light and push forward.
It would have been very easy to begin this episode and to plan it where we talk about the negative. Because anybody who grows up with, we'll say, chaotic parents or addict parents, oftentimes they experience an inferiority. And I want to start with that definition, actually. Have you ever heard the term before this episode, inferiority complex?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I feel like
it's a twin of low self-esteem, right? They go together.
Yeah, they go together, and I think it's been popularized. I think I've heard the term inferiority complex everywhere. Like, I not everywhere, but like I'll be watching the news, and somebody with a big head will, give a speech, and then right after them, somebody will be like, that guy's got inferiority complex. Or I was watching the show 30 Rock, and Jack Donaghy is a mega egotistical CEO who thinks they're right about everything and talks about themselves in the third person. And somebody in the show accuses him of having a superiority complex. So I want to start by saying these are very old ideas from a very old psychologist, but they're extraordinarily relevant today, so much so to where we're still using those terms right now today about, politicians in the news. But I want to point out that it's a healthy thing. That's actually what our whole episode is about today, is the healthiness of having an inferiority complex. So we'll start with the negative, and then we'll come back to our subject, because Shigeru is basically the model of what a healthy inferiority complex looks like. And so we'll go from negative to positive. In the negative, I think that my best example of an inferiority complex was probably my father. He started out in life wanting to succeed. He left high school and immediately tried to go into the Air Force, and he washed out. Like it was too tough for him. And then he tried to go into electrical work. He for small electronics, and he washed out of the tech vocation school that had taken him. Classes were too tough, and honestly, that school was a bad school. Like, they found out later that they were taking kids for all they were worth, and not really returning a good education. But he kept trying, and every time he tried, his tries got smaller. Like he tried big, for family, for Air Force, for making a nuclear family, all that stuff. Didn't work out. The try got smaller. He's like, okay, I'll try vocational school. Didn't work out. He's like, okay, I'll try to be a manager of a fast food restaurant, and that didn't work out. So every time he failed, he shrank a little, and his try got smaller the next time, to the point where late in life, much later, if a doctor seemed to be giving him harsh advice, like, hey man, you need to quit drinking, you need to shape up, you need to take care of yourself, he took it personal. He'd be angry afterward. He would come out of the doctor's office and say, they were disrespecting me. They think they're smart and they know everything. These rich people who have like this mega education, well, they don't know, the human touch. They don't know the soul. They don't know what's inside me. Turns out what was inside him is he really was sick, and the doctors needed to help. But that was my first confrontation with what it looks like when somebody has a negative inferiority. I certainly had that when I was younger. I had we'll call it a malignant version of inferiority, where I was into sports and, martial arts. And if I felt like somebody was smarter than me or better at sports than me, I would either avoid them or try to show them up. I would do one or the other. You either got the me that was, an introvert and didn't want to face them or talk to them, and I would make sure I wasn't on the field with them, or you got the me where I would try to, I was a jerk. If it was, in soccer, I tried to spike their shins. If it was in football, I'd play dirty. And it's just because I felt like they were better than me, so I had to show them that I was the alpha. That doesn't sound like me now. I know that I'm definitely an introvert, but I was very active when I was younger, and I had that in me.
Well, you've always been very physically strong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could tell from martial arts and just the way you are. You're just a physical person. So I'm not shocked. I didn't think you were Jesus to begin with. Okay.
Right. No, there wasn't a turn the other cheek when I was younger. But I've noticed now that I have read about it and I can look at it and see it. We're going to leave links to some really great articles about this. But being able to spot inferiority in both your superiors, your bosses, your family, and in yourself, you can treat it as a superpower. The negative version of inferiority is, I think my best example of this, and probably the funniest one, is what's that old saying? Everybody wants to make more money than their sister's husband. is the phrase. You don't want a brother-in-law that makes more money than you. They'll make you look bad. They'll make you look bad to your parents, to your spouse.
I could just see him with kind of the yuppie guys who's talking about, well, what kind of sailboat are you gonna buy?
Right? Yeah, I'm repairing a sailboat. What are you doing this summer? Yeah, or they whatever car you get, they have the model that is the newer version that is faster. So that is everybody dances with inferiority. The negative version is you start taking it personally. you make your try smaller and smaller the more you kind of get dunked on. And if you are, if inferiority becomes part of your life, it becomes defense mechanisms. You start avoiding stuff. You start avoiding people who make you feel inferior. You start avoiding circumstances that make you feel inferior, and eventually, you start doing truly evil stuff to make sure you don't feel inferior. The evil stuff.
What's
Yeah, go ahead.
What's interesting about that is it seems like a similar step to success. It just seems like it's just not managed as well. I'll give you like sometimes you're taking too big a bite of the elephant. You're not starting with the basics, the block to get, let's say the medical school. You're not taking the biology classes. You're not doing those. Is that it, or is it just bad self-awareness of what you'd be good at?
That is actually a very good way to look at it. Is a lot of inferiority comes from not learning what a small bite looks like and not getting the right kind of rewards from your parents. Like, this really does start in childhood, and we'll use our subject as an example. So Shigeru, the reason why we start with him, I couldn't like he is such a wholesome example of how inferiority can be a positive. He starts with his parents. Like, let's kind of like step by step that narrative that you read for us. um his parents don't get him a TV, and they don't have toys for him. Now, in me, like, because I would feel inferior. Like, I literally had this happen where, like, I didn't have a game system for quite a while as a kid, and I didn't have an abundance of like toys and stuff. And I remember the first time I went to a rich kid's house, and they had like a tire swing in the backyard, and they had a trampoline, and they had a pool, and they had like their house was fully stocked. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like when you have things to play with. Shigeru didn't do what I did. I got angry. I was like, why are my parents deadbeats? Shigeru just made his own toys, and of course, I did that to some degree. But he's like building a ukulele out of string and a milk carton, and like he's building a lantern out of like paper and wood parts. And um, his curiosity and his sense of wonder and amusement overcome that inferiority of, I don't have the things my friends have.
It is resourcefulness, right?
Right, exactly. So he did feel inferior. Like he knew there was a gap. He knew that there was something he didn't have. He knew that there was something that, like, he was lacking, and that his parents weren't making money. Uh, but he turned that into his, like, it said in there, he put on puppet shows and made flip books. And this all sounds like very childish things, right? Like, oh, big deal. This kid is, doing creative things. That's what all kids should do. That is what all kids should do. But all kids should at some point feel inferior to small bite-sized degrees. Like you said, bite-size, take small bites out of life. It's, yeah, go ahead.
There's two things that pop into my head when I was reading the narrative too. It's the comedian, the actor Danny McBride. And do you know how he started his acting career and his comedy?
No, how?
He was building puppets in his church, and so he put on puppet shows with his family on small churches in the South. I think it was South Carolina, and they got so popular they were a traveling puppet show, and they got a lot of attention. And so that's how he got into these characters and acting, was putting on puppet shows every Sunday and every Thursday night. To the point they became a traveling, Brady Bunch band. And then when you were talking, I'm thinking about the Depression generation in this country, where the people said, I am not going to let go through that kind of pain ever again. So I'm going to manage my money well saved. But they still bought houses and bought two cars, and you know what I mean?
Right.
But they were just shrewd business people and said, I'm going to save, and I'm going to put everything in the right order so my family won't go without.
One, I mean, it's great to think that this raunchy comedian who made the Family Jewels started with puppets and something so seemingly wholesome. I bet they was probably crude at some point. What did you feel inferior about when you were young?
I changed schools a lot. And by schools, I meant I changed states. And I went from Maine, I went to Missouri, I went to Washington, I went all over. And so I always had to start over new and make new friends. And I did a really good job of it. And it was always hard. The big thing was who you eat lunch with. It was just so uncomfortable. Just even talking about it right now, I'm getting kind of frightened. But when I was a freshman in high school, in a brand new high school, and somehow it usually took about a year and a half to get in the and to get into that, to get popular, right?
Right.
But somehow I met a couple people and invited me to football, and I just ended up in this circle of the most popular kids in my class. And I remember sitting there at their house, same like you, with all these nice things and stuff. And then the first time, and I was getting a little bit, I was 14, and I noticed for the first time that these popular kids, all of them were good at something. Either they were smart, or they were good looking, or they were funny. Some of them were multiple of these things. And I remember thinking, I am out of my class. I'm just going to sit on my hands and say nothing, because whatever they're going to know that I'm a fraud, that I don't belong here.
You ended up at
And
the Netflix teens high school where like everybody has a specialty.
it was true. There's a reason they're popular. Yeah. But no, I felt terrible, and I it just got hard. And I know you changed schools, so you probably know what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's interesting that you went from having to change schools a lot and feeling inferior because all these popular kids, they have something special about them and unique. And in the meantime, you as an adult, you have spent so much time, like you've been in sales, you've been a owner of your own companies, you have worked with a lot of people who are like extraordinarily successful. So now you have taken that feeling of all these people have something special about them and I'm the odd man out. Now you have this interconnected web, and you're one of what we call the node of nodes, like a connector, as Gladwell would have put it. So you turned that feeling of inferiority in a very one-to-one way into superiority. Is that fair to say?
I think so, and I think the big thing of that is still seeing something special in everybody, whether they're what their age is. And I think that's a big thing. And I think sometimes you have to dig and find it for different people because they don't offer it up. But everybody has something special about them. If you look really hard, I think a lot of people will just dismiss certain people, and unless they're their equals or unless they think they're interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. The two ways a feeling of inferiority can go, like if you're, it's really just you're looking down the road. You can veer left or you can veer right. Left is the feeling of I'm inferior, and I'll just avoid or lash out at the stuff that makes me feel this inferior. It's inferior is too icky of a feeling, too difficult to deal with, too much pressure, and so you just don't deal with it. And that way leads down to, I hate to say it, some politicians, the way they treat other people, where they're like, I know what's best. I'm always right. I've done all the things. They're almost like the one-upper of, the world. That is the kind of narcissism we see in politics and in Hollywood and things like that, where you're like, when you read about nightmare celebrities, where it's like, they are just so narcissistic. They are just so unbearable. And part of that is because they felt inferior for so long, they overcompensated to a degree where it makes them truly terrible people.
Just cruel. What does inferiority look like in a romantic relationship, in a partnership with a loved one, or even in dating and courting?
That's a good question. I used to assume that inferiority in a relationship just looks like the other person makes you feel like you have to compensate, where to borrow an Avril Lavigne lyric, he was a skater boy, she said see you later boy. it's you're not good enough for the other person, but they'll put up with you, you.
You're
Yeah,
you're
go ahead.
lucky to have somebody. You're lucky to have me. You're going to be a whooping bull, right? Sometimes I think people will seek out these partners so they can abuse them, right? I do see that.
Honestly, yeah, if you date somebody who's a lower number than you, the stakes are off. You don't have to worry as much. So if you go and you veer left at the crossroad of inferiority, and this usually sets itself up when you're very young, turn left and you go toward narcissism. You have a superiority complex because you get such a big ego. That's how you overcome icky feelings of being inferior. Or you just avoid altogether, like my father, where you're like, I'm not going to try anymore because every time I try, somebody makes me feel inferior. Somebody makes me feel like I'm not enough, and I'm just tired of that. And so you just hole up in your room and you just hang. The opposite of what Miyamoto did, the inventor of Mario and Donkey Kong and stuff. It was, I don't have toys, I don't have equipment, I don't have gear. I found a cave. Well, I better build my stuff. Like I will build a literal lantern to light my way. I will invent my way forward. And he's a big stepper. Like that's a big bite to take. What you really would expect probably of somebody who is young and feeling inferior is they want to be better at sports because their older brother is. So they just practice a little bit more and they get better at kicking a soccer ball. They feel inferior to their parents because the parents can buy whatever they want. And the kid is like, man, wouldn't money be nice? They start learning about money a little bit. It's natural for a kid to feel inferior almost to everybody around them. Honestly, they feel inferior.
Some of it's just physical size, right? If you have siblings who are bigger than you and kind of shove you around a little bit, tell you you're dumb every day.
Exactly. The funniest inferiority in the world is a younger brother who has older sisters, where they're like,
"Can you imagine?" That's frightening. If both of them have a bad day at school, they're going to take it out on you.
Right?
You're in trouble,
and you can't say anything because they're more clever than you. Like they're more mature, and socially they've got everything figured out.
But if you ever get bullied, you just say, "I'm going to go get my sisters," and that would
right.
It's okay for me to bully him. It's not okay for you.
I'll get my big sister on the case, and you'll wish you had died because she will belittle you in front of everybody. So that's what we're looking at is the superpower of inferiority is that's how we get the best people and the best things in life. If we start out with little bite-sized inferior feelings when we're young, and then every step we take up we face something bigger that makes us feel inferior, and if we can overcome it, that's where you get Miyamoto's story. That's where it goes from I'm building a paper lantern to go look in this cave because I don't have toys, and then you get to I'm going to this company called Nintendo who makes playing cards, and I'm going to put in my resume to be an engineer, and then they put you on building the case around a video game system. And then you finally prove to them, hey, I can build anything. I can make any character. I can design any game. I can do anything. So what you really want is you want bite-sized feelings of inferiority that are small enough for you to conquer as you go up the ladder. Almost like a video game. It's ironic that the person who invented Mario treated inferiority like a video game, like it was stages. And that's hopefully what we all do. That is how you get good, is you treat inferiority like stages that you can conquer. And my next question is, what were some of your stages that you conquered? Because we talk about the connection between you felt inferior in school sometimes, but then you ended up being, extremely, deft at business and connecting with people and gaining understanding and knowledge from them almost on a Socratic level where you're like talking to everybody and like taking their little hints and tips. What was that bridge? Did you have any moment that you can think of where you're like, oh, this is what it feels like to level up? Like this is you meet somebody and it's like, oh, okay, I get this. I get why I was feeling inferior. Did that ever happen to you?
It did. And professionally, it was in sales when I was going from job to job. I was going from car dealership to car dealership in sales. And in car dealership, when you don't sell any cars or you only sell a few, you end up making minimum wage. And then they kind of cut that in half too. And then they ended up paying you just, it's wage theft at its best. You end up working for free.
I was about to say wage theft.
And I got a new job and they took me. I wasn't doing anything. So they took me and they stuck me in this room and made me watch these videotapes. And I was so humiliated because they didn't do it to anybody else. There were other new guys. And they only did it for me. and I had to watch him all day. And this guy's name was Joe Verde, and he was a condescending sales trainer. And all he did auto sales training. That's what he did. He had this system, and he said, "Don't." During his class, he'd browbeat people who would challenge him on it. He was not open to feedback or their market. They didn't care where you live. If you sold cars at the booth, this is how you do it, right? And I watched these tapes, and because I had nothing else to do, I still needed that minimum wage to stay, with a roof over my head. And I just did it. I took cue cards and I studied it, and they said I had to know it like the back of my hand, and I did, and I used it, and it worked. And I thought, oh, there's steps, there's structure to this. And then I realized that they give deals to certain people who do things their way. I didn't know that either. And then overnight, I went from minimum wage to making $5,000 a month. And in the early 90s, that was a lot of money.
Right.
And so with it came a lot of confidence. And then I realized that what I realized is you don't get ahead by things you do at work or school. The people that get ahead do things after work. And so every day after work, I would go home and I would play video games and listen to audiobooks by sales trainers every single day for hours. And I do that every day. But I play video games anyway. It was just adding that one thing. I was still having fun. I was playing my Sega,
Okay.
But I'd add that in, and it would just kind of keep me full and keep me moving. So I just got a real good education. I did that for a few years.
That is a extremely good example of turning a feeling of inferiority to superiority. It's getting bullied at work, being put into the dumb room where you got to watch these videos, and then going from that to taking moments for yourself to learn a thing. Like that is quite literally, I feel inferior. I'm being made to feel inferior. Here's the parts I'm missing. And they're not even necessarily what somebody is screaming at you as a superior to you. It's more you learned from the process, the system, the things that you took away. Like, it's interesting. You didn't say those videos taught me a lot. You said I learned on my own a lot more about this. Like you did it while you were listening to podcasts or audiobooks rather than those videos they made you watch.
Have you had a similar thing in your writing career?
Yes, absolutely. Any writer who tells you they did not feel inferior to another writer is lying to you. At every stage, it was, I want to be like the best writers that I know. That's how it starts is, this book is amazing. Holy crap. I wonder if I could write something like this. And then it's abysmal. You do a very terrible job and you feel inferior. And so you start reading. You're like, okay, what do I need to know? I'll learn how to edit. So I got a book on, like literally a basic book that was very generically titled How to Edit for Fiction Writers. And then after that, I entered some contests, realized that I wasn't going to make it, talk to the people who had also entered the contest and won, and realized they're better than me. Like the process of learning to write better is facing the fact that you are actually worse, than the people you're talking to.
Isn't that an awakening, though? Isn't that a moment of clarity? Because you don't realize that until all of a sudden you do. You know what I mean? I have to do something better to be at that level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That takes some maturity.
It does, and I heard somebody at the Writers Guild,
or some surrender, right?
Yeah, that's a better word for it, surrender. I heard somebody at the Writers Guild say that if anybody ever felt, if you don't feel confident when you start, then you probably wouldn't continue. Meaning that, when you very first start writing, you feel pretty good and you feel like you can tell the story. If everybody started out knowing how bad they were, nobody would make it past that part. They would look at the page and realize how awful they are, and they would just walk away. They'd be like, "Oh, it takes, it's going to take how long to get better? Like, how long is it going to take before I can actually write like the books?" And then they just leave. So yeah, you have to start out with confidence. You have to start out not knowing how bad you are to even get started, and then you, during that process of realizing how that you need to push, you need to take more bites, and you need to take small bites, but you need to take more of them. That's how you turn inferiority into superiority. And the reason why that is a superpower, and the reason why we're talking about it today, because it all this sounds like again, this is a episode of this sounds like no duh stuff, but if you're doing it subconsciously, you're not doing it as well as you could. It,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and inferiority. I can't say inferiority doesn't stop. We're talking about adolescence and stuff. That's not where it stops, though.
no.
Some people do that. People face this their whole life.
Some people get worse about it when they get older. Some people get a decent job and they think that fixes them, and then they run into somebody who is smarter than them, better than them, faster than them, whatever, like mentally, or makes more money. That's the big one, is go to a PTA meeting and run into the parents who make way more money than you, and try not to feel inferior. And because you've been through so much in life, you think you shouldn't feel this way anymore.
Yeah, I could just see that couple, perfect white teeth, beautiful, like good posture. You know what I mean? And you're just like, am I the same species as these people?
Right.
Their kids are just perfect.
Well, if I haven't sold you on being able to spot your own inferiority and to embrace it and take small bites out of it, then I will say that if I haven't sold you on it already, then you should know this is a integral part of stoicism. If you've read Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, which I very much recommend, or if you haven't read about realistic stoicism, the problem with saying the word stoicism these days is it's become the new hotness in Silicon Valley and in big tech. A lot of CEOs like to pretend that they're stoics. In reality, they're not really doing it right, and they feel inferior all the time. Like what is it? Elon Musk hired some people to play video games for him so he could pretend to be great at video games because his target audience is 16-year-old boys. Um, so a lot of people say the word stoicism. What they actually mean is they just want to be superior to other people. If you want to be a real stoic, what you do is you figure out how you are inferior and if it's worth your time getting better at something. And if it is, it's figuring out what are those small bites you need to take to improve. That is the backbone of basically stoicism, is knowing what you can and cannot change. So that's my selling point to you, Todd, is if I haven't already sold you on embrace feeling inferior, just get better at identifying it consciously, then that is my pitch to you.
I'm buying. I like what you're saying. What I like about it of feeling inferior is, I think when you feel equal or superior, which I think a lot of people do when they meet someone that I'm stronger than them, but I'm richer than them, I'm this than them, I have a faster car than they are. I think you're being overconfident.
Yeah.
I think it's good to measure, and not that we're fighting these people, but there is a lot about the contest, right? We're competing, right?
Right. So I do want to go through the steps of how to identify and move in a realistic way to superiority. But first, I want to know more about Miyamoto.
Okay.
Just because, like, it I can't believe that this is such a, I don't know, I guess innocent, almost like a cartoon character in himself. And yet he was such a massive part of my childhood. Like, he invented all the characters I played on Nintendo. So I'm like,
oh my gosh, yeah,
how? Yeah.
Let me start. Okay, I think it was interesting. Miyamoto, and he's kind of silly. Like, he's the kind of guy who doesn't take himself too seriously either. This is a guy you cheer for, no matter how many millions of dollars he's made. Okay, I think that it's interesting. He started with puppets. We're talking about how he had to create these characters and all that. That's true, but doesn't that, Joe, seem like a huge leap to go to something so technical, like creating new video? Because these weren't like he was just kind of, video games are kind of being created, especially isn't that a big jump?
Did I read right that it was like he entered video games when Atari was out? So it's like, that doesn't feel right.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like he's playing with literal puppets, and like meanwhile the best video games out there are just like a pixel moving across the screen shooting another pixel. Like it doesn't seem like 1 + 1 does not equal 2 in this.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem like the natural thing, because Nintendo was a smaller company. They were a big company, but they're in the gaming business. But they weren't going. And they decided to make the move towards the technical. And he wasn't a great engineering student. He was a mediocre student. So he wouldn't have been this one that they that they were been recruited, and he was this shining star that they're going to put at the top. He applied to Nintendo to be an industrial design. It was a card games and a toy company, and they turned him down. So he had to pull strings. He had to get in with the big wigs. And then to reward him, he's this creative genius, but they don't see him like that. So they have him designing the packaging. Can you imagine just a waste of putting someone, and I see this in sports all the time. They have all these scouts for college teams and NFL teams, and they'll miss this guy who is off the charts physically, emotionally. And how do 300 colleges miss him and 36 pro teams miss him for all these people whose job it is to measure these things, right? And that's how I feel it is with
They're like,
Miyamoto.
Be the towel boy. Like he's
talk to the guy.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's like, how could you miss this? You know, someone should get fired. All of you should be fired for missing this.
Right. Know? Yeah. They're like, we are a game company here. Make our plastic packaging around our packs of like cards. That's really apt. Like, I didn't think about it in sports terms, but that is kind of like be our towel boy.
But for your stoic approach, Nintendo, why they want to get into video games is because they were humbled by Space Invaders. So they saw the money, but they were like, will we be able to do this? Can we surround ourselves with people? And so when they did get Miyamoto in the creative, put him in the leadership role and have him creating games, this is my favorite one. He used to ride his bike everywhere, like when he was a kid, when he was exploring those tunnels for the Zelda tunnels, you know, in his mind. He would ride his bike, you know, this guy's making millions of bucks. He'd ride his bike to work every day. They said, you can't ride your bike anymore, Joe. You're too valuable. We want you in a car. And that just says a lot about his character, that he's that kind of free, you know, riding his bike, you know, dee, 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 dee.
I imagine him like whistling on his way, exactly. Literally whistling to work.
And they said, you can't do that anymore. He was so valuable that when he retired, the stock dipped. The company lost $1 billion that day. That when they found out that he left. Now, I grew up. His big hit, which really put him on the map, was Donkey Kong. Now, I am of the age where I remember standing in line at the laundromat and waiting to play Donkey Kong, and standing around a big machine and watching other kids play and waiting my turn. And then the big move was when they went to Mario Brothers. And then Mario Brothers was in the consoles that were for homes. That was the big leap, and he helped him with all that.
Yeah, that's where I entered as child. Is I was not of the age to be playing Donkey Kong at arcades. My thing was, my parents got a Nintendo system, and it was for the whole family, and we lived in separate houses, so we had to share. So like they were divorced at that point, so like we physically had to sometimes like move the Nintendo. Like
how much did you guys play Mario Brothers?
Constantly. Like it was if you're not playing it, you're watching it.
Every household it was on.
Yeah. I remember my brother was the one who like had the magic touch, and he finally finished the game. Like he got the furthest. And I've never had a moment where like the whole family is gathered around somebody playing a video game, cheering as they finish the game. Like that's it's what when they now advertise games as entertainment for the whole family, that's what they mean, and it's never been like that since.
Now what's interesting about that is Mario Brothers was not successful in the in-store, the big bulky versions. It wasn't a hit. They had to repackage it, but they didn't give up on it. Isn't that funny? Because usually
I did not know that.
If something doesn't fly, but it was kind of in that transitional period where those big machines were going away. And the first Donkey Kong was supposed to be Popeye, the spinach eating sailor, but they couldn't agree on a deal. So whoever owned the rights to Popeye made a big mistake by not signing off on that. $1 billion mistake.
Okay, so wait, Popeye would throw the barrels, or Bluto, right, his bully, would throw the barrels at him? The bad guy would throw. Okay,
and he was gonna save olive oil.
Oh,
right?
No,
makes sense. Yeah,
no shit. So it wasn't supposed to be a big monkey; it was supposed to be a big sailor.
No, it was, and they were all in on it. It looked great. It looked way better.
That's
But
funny.
the Popeye people were being too crowned up and thought, no, we're going to hold out for more money. And they finally signed later, but by then Donkey Kong had already made billions of dollars.
Okay. Well, that actually makes things more sense because, like, sailors would have barrels around them. This they'd be throwing them down a dock. Like, now it just, yeah, it became a fever dream. Now it's an Italian facing off against a monkey throwing cargo around like that. That's a lot weirder. So okay, that makes sense.
Now, my favorite thing about Miyamoto, and there's a lot to like about this guy, but what I really, really noticed was he was very good at collaborating with other people, with other executives to getting things done. And he was always working on new ideas. And he was never coasting on his prime time, his Mario Brothers Donkey Kong days. He acknowledged those and he had moved on to what's next, what's next, what's next. And very few business people or leaders or creative people do that. They usually have a prime, like our Bee Gees episode,
Right.
you know. But he was always improving and looking for new ideas.
That is something consistent I've noticed whenever we do episodes about this, where even if somebody stumbles, fails, gets rejected, they're usually looking forward. Like they try to do their absolute best in the moment, and then usually they are looking for the next immediate thing in front of them that will be the whatever they have to work on, and trying to prioritize it based on importance. I think there is a connection there to inferiority. I think that because we've run into that so often, I think people feel inferior to their failures to a very, very small degree, like a grain, and then they just use that in the next thing. So did this endear you to him more than like finding out about Miyamoto and finding out about the invention of Mario and stuff? I had started to get cynical about Nintendo just being a massive company, and I've become to distrust companies so much lately. This actually made me kind of like them a little bit more.
Well, yeah, me too. And it's what's funny is I always brag, and we do talks about the United States has strengthened most American companies is their flexibility. And for a Japanese company to be in this creative space and this tech space and be so forward thinking,
Yeah,
and it's impressive, I don't know who in the United States we could compare it to, but they seem to have that down.
that really does feel like a almost like a, oh, what do you call it? Well, like a Henry Ford kind of move where it's like, we make playing cards. Okay, we'll transition to Atari because they're putting out space. And that seems like a wild leap to make, but like,
That's a big stretch, right? There's,
yeah,
there's a lot of things to either a lot of jobs to fill, right?
right, exactly. Um, so if you are willing, I kind of want to walk through the process now of how to go from inferior to superior. Um, and I don't mean superior as in we want you to have a superiority complex, which is bad. That makes you a narcissist. I mean, like, how do you take a bite out of your inferiority? How do you make sure it's a bite you can handle? How do you transition that into getting better, like stoically getting better at something? Um, so the first one is don't do what I do. um, I mentioned when I was younger and I was in sports, I would look at somebody who was better than me at something, especially if it was a one-on-one sport. Like I was in Taekwondo, and then I went eventually from that to different martial arts. If somebody was better than me, I either needed to show them up or I needed to avoid them. And that's oftentimes because I looked at myself as a failure if I could not win against them. Like if I knew they were better at sparring than me, I would just be like, "Oh no, I'm not good. Like they are just better." I didn't think of it as they're better in this moment, or they've practiced this one thing more than I have, or they've worked out a particular muscle better than I have. I'm just like, no, I as a person am not as good.
But don't you think martial arts or boxing are probably the best example of that? Because you literally get your ass kicked.
Yes.
it and it probably hurts more your feelings than it does your face, though. Are you following me?
Oh, 1000%. No, no. Okay. I'm a dummy. I used to think of it like, cause I watched so many cartoons as a kid. I used to think of it like Dragon Ball Z or like, Marvel comics or something. It's like, oh no, their power level is higher than mine. I dumbed it way down to a simple metric where I'm like, no, they're just simply better. and I got beat up. Like that's how I internalized it. Like you're saying, like I just felt like I was below them because they beat me down to being below them. um,
As you limp and bleed out of your nose,
right. Um, but the way to look at it is more like the the Shigeru way, which is name the thing that you are not as good at. So instead of spiraling and catastrophizing it and saying I'm inferior, like I'm just a piece of shit, the good way to do this is I'm not as good at this pretty specific thing that I want to be quite yet. Um, and that's now served me in writing very well. If I can, it takes work. That's the problem. The reason why it's not instinctive to do this, it's much easier to look at somebody who makes more money than you and say, oh, they're better than me. They've got a better position. They have a placard on their desk that says boss, and I don't. I'm not there. It's much more productive if you can stop, take some time, and identify, here's the specific way they're better than me. And it hurts to do that too. It not only takes calories to make that ID, but it also, it physically makes you feel bad to have to look into this and think about it for a while.
Well, but there's a good way I can help with this step of it is to video it and to get somebody with a lot more experience, who isn't a yes person, isn't a no person, but is an expert, a coach, a trainer. And we've done this with public speaking. It's so hard to watch yourself give a public, to watch the audio.
Oh my
video
God.
of you speaking, but it works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it hurts. And if you get somebody who can sit there and walk you through and say, okay, your jab is in there, your feet are in the wrong spot. So now I can focus on my jab or my footwork, or in speaking, I can show some of my word choice or where I'm standing or my posture. But there's some basic things you can start with, right? Like real fundamentals.
Yeah.
You can see them.
A
little bit embarrassment will do you well, do you good.
I love that you went to the speech contests and public speaking with this, because we went to a place where you would speak or give an evaluation, and then you were rated by your peers in large groups, and so you got a metric of how you had failed. And that sounds terrifying, but
it's a public shunning, right?
Yeah.
Public.
But instead of looking at the person who got first or second above me and saying, "Oh, I'm worse than them. Like I'm just not as good." Maybe someday. It was more productive to take a recording and be able to identify, I did better than them with my technical critique of somebody's speech, but I was not as personable. I did not come off warm. I did not come off as, I didn't have as much clarity and showmanship as they did. They came off as warm and welcoming when they described, what was wrong with the speech. I came off like a robot.
But you did some things well.
Yeah.
You're not a total loss. This is worth doing again.
Yes. And that's move number 2 is, after you identify what specific thing makes you inferior in a task, then you start, you go back and you build your lantern. You go back to your cave. You start working on what it is, and you have to start building something. Now here's the part that hurts. It's easy to say, go back and work on that specific thing you have identified. What you need to stop doing first is what I was doing. You need to stop assuming that what you lack is purely disadvantage. So I would oftentimes, if I was bad at something, especially in school, and I still do this, I blame my parents. Like I would blame my upbringing, that like they didn't value education, they didn't value school. I did not have tutors or any kind of advantage whatsoever in academia. In fact, it was generally understood in my family that you don't go to college unless you are just outstandingly blindingly brilliant to the point where you just get in for free. That's the only way you go to college in my family is you're so smart you get scholarships. So I grew up with that feeling of inferiority to smart people. I was like, this is from my disadvantage. I'll never overcome this.
I'll never be good enough. You have to be that kind of which is totally ridiculous, right?
Right. So I was able to identify, I'm very specifically not good at this type of writing. I'm specifically not good at this type of math. Like I could identify it, but I was still putting it down to disadvantage, and that this is where my deprivation is coming from. So phase two, once you have identified where you are inferior, and make a practice of it. That's actually step 1.5 is if you're not doing this every day in some small way, then you're not using it. You really do have to make a practice of doing this. Like identify where am I inferior? Why did I just feel inferior to my brother-in-law or whoever it is? And once I've identified it, what unique specific way am I inferior, and how would I start building on it that doesn't just blame my disadvantage for it. um and then the final move is how do I build that productively. So this is where we go back to our old psychologist, Adler. The core of feeling inferior is that it has a short shelf life. Um and you wouldn't believe how quickly the feeling of inferiority goes away if you just make, you don't have to make your brother-in-law's money. Everyone's going to think after this that I have a rich brother-in-law. That's not true. I'm using it as an example, but you don't have to make their money. You just have to make $5 more. Like you get a slight promotion or even a promise of a promotion at work. You'll automatically feel better. You'll be like, okay, problem solved. Clap your hands, dust it off, move on. If you act on the gap, if you act on how you feel inferior, even a little bit, that inferiority goes away real fast. Like you would not believe it.
If you sign up, it's so funny when you start working towards a challenge, when you sign up for a class, get a tutor and start going, and you kind of see behind the Oz curtain a little bit, and you're like, oh, they weren't, you just feel like people were gifted and things are easy for them when you realize, oh, or if you give one good speech, or some people you get a bunch of attention for it, you almost, even though you're not to their level yet, you start to really get confidence really fast.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're closing the distance, right?
Yes, absolutely. I just thought of another good example of this that really happened in my life. I was talking to somebody who is my age. I'm 41 now. I was talking to somebody who they were referring to their retirement, and this is somebody who is my age and in finance. And they were just like, "Oh yeah, no, something." Like I got good returns on the stock change, and they're like, my retirement plan's looking pretty good. And I felt very inferior because I'm like, my retirement plan is I just die. Like I came up from labor class, like my family doesn't do retirement. Like we just work until we fall apart. And that's the millennial plan now too. Like the younger generation does not have a pension. We just die. And so I felt very inferior. I was like, oh man, like, there's no way I will ever make up that gap. There's no way I even come close. And they're saying that, you have to have more and more money to retire these days. So it's like, there's never going to be a point where I'm at that. But what I did do is I went home and I realized that the bank, the mega conglomerate bank that I'm banking with, gives me no benefits or bonuses to banking with them, except they sometimes charge extra for like overdrafts and things like that. So there's nothing positive coming out of them except they let you use their computers. Like they let you use their service, but they don't give you anything in return. So I was like, okay, I'm never going to have a big retirement. I can put aside a small percentage of my money, which is already very meager, especially because I'm going back through college. Like I'm going to school again. I'm never going to be able to put away money for retirement. But what I can do is I can switch banks. That's a small, tiny thing I can feel less inferior about. And yeah, it's not a joke. As soon as I did that, I'm like, I switched to a credit union that is much more generous. They have a better plan. Like I ran my plan past an AI just to double check the tiny fine details that I didn't want to read myself, which is very lazy of me, but still. And in a very meaningful way, I came out of that feeling less inferior and I felt better. And I'm like, oh, that's what Adler, this psychologist, was talking about. This is how to do this in real life.
And it does. It builds momentum, and it doesn't say, well, "Who cares? What's the difference?" It is a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think we need a word between like confidence and progress, right? We need some kind of special word in English that explains
right
that these small bites of improving your overall picture lead to other things.
Unfortunately, the term used by this old psychologist was moving toward superiority, and it's a very clunky, bullshitty way of saying it. So I don't like it. But stoic is a good word. But yeah, I'm with you. We need a way to describe that.
You've been listening to the Re-Engineer You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us.
You can find us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where I have research links, show notes, and feedback.
We're not experts on anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.